Evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? You all right? Have we got any runners in? There we go. What are the rest of you doing here? Walking. It's a good answer, yeah, it's solid. It's our last ever show of These Hills Are Ours. Well, you say that now, but wait till the end. Thanks, though. Some of you might have seen the sign, bless you. Oh, no, that wasn't a sneeze. It was someone's dropped their glass eye or something. You might have seen, as you came in, a sign saying that we're filming the performance this evening. So, no pressure. But it does mean that you've got to be an extra good audience for a potential global audience of 8 billion. It's on you, it's not on us.
Why would you film the very last show? What's the point of that? Don't you film the show so that you encourage more people to come and see it in the future?
Yeah, we should have thought about this earlier, really, shouldn't we? I've got no answer for that.
No.
For the people who couldn't come tonight, the 3 or 4 of you who didn't make it, we should probably actually...
Are you talking to a television audience then?
Yeah, where's the camera? Straight down the camera. Hi.
My goodness, so
like and
slick.
Subscribe. That really split the room, didn't it? Along probably age lines. Now, I've never done a show before with a big clock directly in front of me, but that is what's happening here, and that tells me that we should probably start. This isn't the show, this is just us talking. Although the show's quite a bit like that, actually, now that I think about it. Should we crack on?
Well, let's do that. So you run the years along, between the unknown and the known, from the armchair to the trig point, to measure how much you've grown. I never made it as a pop star, I never piloted a plane, but I can run to the horizon and back again. Beyond the edges of the map, where the world begins to shrink, where friends and enemies, we're not as far apart as you think. I never trained as a surgeon, I never drove a crane, but I can run to the horizon and back again. Run away from what you know, plan to lead yourself astray. It's a world full of adventure, just a journey away. I never played for the Clarets, I never played the Dane, but I can run to the horizon and back again. I never ran in the Olympics, I never drove a train, la 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 la. I can run to the horizon and back again. Thank you.
From several places in the centre of Stockton-on-Tees, a few in the centre of Middlesbrough, and even a handful of places as far away as Hartlepool. I know. You can see the silhouette of Roseberry Topping on the skyline. It's not a high peak, but it is an imposing one. It looms. It's probably a hill rather than a mountain, but it does have what Walter Scott described as a mountainous aspect. And what even is a mountain anyway? What makes them so special? Does anyone have a definition of what differentiates a mountain from a mere hill? This is a genuine question. Pointiness.
Brilliant.
I like it. As set down in the Beaufort Pointiness Scale, Oxford University.
Pointiness.
Yeah. Any others? So that's a slightly more prosaic definition, but somehow also more likely to be accurate. 1,000 metres. Okay. So I think that means that in England we haven't got any by that definition. Anything else?
We did have someone who once said, it's got snow on it. Actually, last night in Hebden Bridge, obviously in Hebden Bridge, someone said, it's a mountain if you decide it's one. Although Whalley is the new Hebden Bridge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the new Hebden Bridge if you decide it's the new Hebden Bridge.
Yeah.
It's up to you, Whalley. What about you, Boff? What's your definition?
It's 2,000 feet. Yeah. It's not my definition. It was ratified by the National Geographical Association in 1924. I made that up. It's 2,000 feet because I grew up in Lancashire at the foot of Pendle Hill. Pendle Hill is 1,860 feet tall. And so growing up, we always knew that it wasn't quite a mountain, and we're repeatedly told so, adding to our kind of sense of inadequacy.
Well, I think by any of those definitions, Roseberry Topping is a hill rather than a mountain. But it stands out. It still exerts this kind of magnetic pull all across Teesside. Ask anyone who grew up on Teesside, and they'll tell you they went up half a dozen times when they were a kid, and it used to take what felt like 4 hours to get to the top, and the same back down again, actually. A proper day out, with only just enough time left to get an ice cream at Suggett's before it got dark. Do you want me to answer that? So I was surprised to go back and discover that if you push it, you can get from the car park to the top in less than 10 minutes. We used to drive from where I lived in Middlesbrough, so if you told me it was 50 miles away, I'd have said, yeah, that sounds about right. But then one day when I was in sixth form, Matthew Allen suggested we cycle there that evening. Well, I'd been up a dozen times by this point and only ever got there in a car. So the idea that you could get from town to top under your own steam was obviously impossible. But somehow Matthew persuaded me to try. So that evening, in the warm of early summer, off we went. It turns out it was only about 11 miles. We were absolutely drenched in sweat when we got there, though. So knackered that we barely bothered kicking round the football we'd brought with us for some reason. And the sun was getting lower in the sky. So in the end, we didn't go up. We just got back on our bikes and cycled home, singing all the way with the exhilaration of even half an adventure. And from that point, I knew that this silhouette of a hill that I could see on the horizon could be got to under my own power. If there was a nuclear attack, I'd be able to escape. The freedom of that feeling was exhilarating. But I did always regret not taking the extra time to get to the top. So, early one bright, cold morning, a little over a year ago, I pulled on my trail running shoes, stuffed some energy gels in the pockets of my shorts, strapped on my heart rate monitor because I'm that kind of running wanker, and set off from the centre of Stockton. I ran through Thornaby, where my mam used to have a terrible job, through Acklam, where we lived in a nice house for a year and a bit, and through Linthorpe, where we lived in a less nice house for 16 years and a bit. Past the terrible school where I was badly bullied, which has now been knocked down, and past the little library I used to hide in, now also knocked down. Every trace of my unpleasant childhood might have been systematically bulldozed, but I can still run through it all and watch the dial on my heart rate monitor spike with the trauma. Then you join the Martin West Beck Trail, and it all goes quiet. The trail winds round the golf course, where we used to pinch balls that had fallen in the beck, past the urban farm at Colby Newham, where I was once present at a lambing presided over by my first girlfriend's dad. One of the lambs was named after me. It died soon afterwards. The trail continues to wind its way along the beck, through Fairy Dell, along a couple of quiet roads, and then out the back of Middlesbrough through Nunthorpe village, and suddenly the houses have fallen away and fields open up, and there's Roseberry Topping again, suddenly much nearer and clearer. Not just a silhouette now, it's a real rocky landform with actual perceptible detail. You run through fields on bridleways and farm tracks, and it's incredibly muddy, and you're getting closer, and before you know it, you're in the car park at Newton-under-Roseberry, and it's only a short climb to the top. By the time you get to the top, you haven't even done a half marathon, and you think, why don't more people do this? It's no huge distance. You could walk it comfortably and be in the King's Head while they're still serving lunch. But despite all that, it feels like you've left one world and entered another. Somehow Stockton and Roseberry Topping just aren't meant to be connected on foot. There are unwritten rules we all live by. And this definitely breaks at least a handful of them. It feels like you've got one up on the man.
I'm going to start with an old joke. How do you know when somebody's run a marathon? They tell you.
Is that a little dig at me?
No, actually. No.
Does anybody believe him? I think I'd forgive you if it was. I think it's fair to say that I've been known to occasionally advertise my running exploits to the extent of making a whole show about them, for example. Whereas Boff, by contrast, is a more humble sort of runner. When I first got to know Boff, I wasn't that overawed by having a friend who'd had a top 10 single and toured the world in his rock and roll band. But then he told me his 10K time. And I thought, holy shit, I'm in the presence of greatness.
Which is a bit sad, isn't it, really? Especially the non-runners who are here are thinking, oh, my goodness, it's that kind of show. Mr. Daniel, 3 heart rate monitors by. He has 3 heart rate monitors, 1 heart, of course. Some would say, if that. Sorry, cheap shot.
How long is this comedy roast going to go on for?
So me and Dan, we've kind of been running together for quite a few years, and we decided it'd be nice to kind of do something about it, like be able to kind of construct a story about our running together. And one of the things that we first hit on was the fact that we have very different approaches to running. And in fact, I think one of the first phrases that we were coming up with was the kind of Morecambe and Wise of running. But we couldn't work out which one was which. But so Dan, he's obsessed with times. That's one thing, as he kind of demonstrated then, lap times and split times and what's your 5K and what's your 10K and all that. And I don't wear a watch when I'm running or any other time, so I have no idea. And at some point I thought I ought to kind of, humour Dan and be able to join in on this conversation about being able to time everything that you do. So I went on eBay and bought myself a special watch for these kind of conversations. I don't know if you can see it. It's a sundial watch. Hang on, check the clock. Yep. So Dan doesn't ask me anymore. Dan is the kind of person that he knows, if I go out running, I think, a Mars bar or whatever, Dan can do a blind taste test of different brands and flavours of all the energy gels. He's not denying it either. Dan is also obsessed with this thing called Strava. And before, when I've said that, Strava, as happened then, there's always a little murmur of, people get obsessed by Strava. For anyone that doesn't know what Strava is, it's an app that somehow connects your phone and the mileage that you do, GPS and your laptop, and you go for a run, say, 35, 40 minutes, up round Otley Shevin, really pleasant. You get back and you log that run onto Strava, and then you sit down and look at it for about 3.5 hours. Dan believes that if you don't log a run onto Strava, then it never existed. You didn't go.
That man there just kind of anticipated you to the end of that sentence. I think I've got some backup. I think that's definitely true. And the reason I like that is because it means, well, Boff's not on Strava. He's never been for a run in his life.
Which is fine anyway. One of the things that I get to do in this show is to digress. I think it's a really nice thing, because if you're going running or walking, instead of just kind of sticking to the paths every so often, it's nice to go, do you know what, let's just head off over this way. So right now we're going to head off in the direction of my guitar foot pedals. Oh, wow, they're all thinking. I'm just going to tell you about two of them. There's this one here is a wah-wah pedal.
You just accuse me of being really geeky.
It's a wah-wah pedal. It sounds like this. And that's an analog sound. An analog sound is kind of basically how sounds used to be made. They are still made, but how sounds in foot pedals used to be made. And when you look at them on a graph of kind of sound waves, they look like this. They're beautiful, smooth, curved lines, and they can be really shallow or they can be really steep. But they're like, and to me they're like like a grassy-topped hill or mountain, not a kind of craggy thing or anything like that. The Howgills comes to mind. There are lots of these, but just beautiful, tall mountains, but beautiful curves and grassy. By contrast, we have the digital delay pedal, which is the little white one next to it. It sounds like this. And the digital delay pedal, if you look at the digital sound waves, they're not curved at all. They're like this. They're in blocks, along, up, down, along, all straight lines. And basically, they look like a cityscape. They look like looking at high-rise flats and multi-story car parks. And so the kind of story that we're going to tell tonight is basically about our attempt to escape this and find this.
In 1932, long before the city went digital, a group of workers wanted to escape the smog and industry of their urban environment, but they weren't allowed to. Most of the countryside at this time was privately owned, and there were hardly any rights of way for ordinary people. So one day, in April 1932, hundreds of them set out from Manchester, and hundreds more from Sheffield, bound for the top of Kinder Scout, which, as the highest point in the Peak District at 2,089 feet, I think, just about qualifies as a mountain, although Wikipedia describes it as a moorland plateau. Led by pint-sized firebrand Benny Rothman, the people from Manchester got there first, where police and gamekeepers lay in wait for them. There was a pitched battle. But this is one of those rare stories where people power and protest absolutely come out on top. The protesters won the numbers game, and the police and gamekeepers were forced to stand down. But landed authority still had one or two tricks left up its sleeve. So as the protesters started to separate, as they got down to the bottom of the mountain, they were picked up one at a time. 6 of them, including Benny Rothman, were arrested and sent to trial, at which those same police and gamekeepers formed an orderly queue in order to commit perjury. The judge, who was genuinely good mates with the landowner, managed in his summing up to not all that subtly imply that with foreign-sounding names like Rothman, several of the defendants were obviously Jewish. The jury, who between them represented a diverse range of landowners and military men, did their duty and found the defendants guilty.
5 of the 6 people who found guilty were sent to prison for up to 6 months, and the resulting outrage right across the country meant that another mass trespass was arranged as soon as the trial had finished. And this one was going to be at a place called Winnet's Pass, which is several miles south of Edale and Kinder Scout. And whereas at the Kinder Scout trespass there'd been round about 400 people turned up, at Winnet's Pass there were 10,000.
The numbers game was irresistible now. That demand for access couldn't be ignored any longer.
And that demand for access meant that another firebrand who'd been at the Kinder Scout mass trespass called Tom Stevenson decided that he would try and create Britain's first long-distance public footpath, which was to be the Pennine Way. And it started in 1932. It took him 23 years until it was finally opened. Along the way, he had to fight lots of legal and occasionally physical battles with gamekeepers and farmers and with landowners, and then with local town councils, with the government, until it was finally opened in April 1965, significantly on the anniversary of the Kinder Scout mass trespass. And it also wasn't a coincidence that Tom decided that the beginning of the Pennine Way should be at Edale, at the foot of Kinder Scout, which is where all these stories come back to.
In tribute, Boff and I decided to run a series of routes from the centre of the town or city in which we find ourselves to the top of the peak overlooking that town or city, or to the nearest high or wild, remote or free place, somewhere where it felt like we'd escaped. We decided to do this as far as possible by rights of way, public footpaths, bridle ways, canal towpaths, where necessary, back alleys. It's a tribute to the Kinder trespassers and to Tom Stevenson and to the freedoms they won us. Without what they did, most of the hills we're going to talk about going up tonight, or mountains, or moorland plateau, most of them would still be inaccessible to us.
There's a timeline in the Pennines, and it's scribbled in the mud. It's the path of most resistance, with a history stamped in studs. You can keep your squares and statues, you can keep your ivory towers, you can keep your 4-lane highways. These hills are ours, these hills are ours. We have a born right to roam, these hills are ours. From boundary stone to boundary stone, when we're up on the horizon, it feels like coming home. These hills are ours, these hills are ours. Wipe the mug from your shoes as you take the witness stand, for there are boundaries in the courtroom, just like the boundaries on the land. When the Clyde comes down on Bleaklow, what use your privilege and power? We'll mow the lawns of your estate, but these hills are ours, these hills are ours. We have a born right to roam, these hills are ours. From boundary stone to boundary stone, when we're up on the horizon, it feels like coming home. These hills are ours, these hills are ours, these hills are ours. Thank you.
We want to continue that tradition of running from wherever we find ourselves to somewhere where it feels like we've escaped. We've done this after every show on the multiple tours of this show that we've had. And so tomorrow morning will be our one last run as part of this project. Tomorrow morning we'll run from here. Are there any well-known hills in the Whalley area at all? I'm sure we can find something, as long as we decide it's a mountain, right? So tomorrow morning we will run from just outside Whalley Courthouse up the Chevin, I guess. Why not? And because it's the last show, you all have to come. And don't worry, I will remind you at the end. Oh, I should also say, I'm afraid it's got to be very early because I've got to drive the van quite a long way afterwards. So tomorrow morning, outside the courthouse, 7 a.m. See you all there. Thanks very much. I'm going to talk about the nearest hill to where I now live, which is, I live in Lancaster, on the wrong side of the Pennines. So one person there standing up for Lancashire. Well done, sir. And the nearest peak to where I live is called Clougher Pike. It's got quite a bit in common with Roseberry Topping, actually. It's similarly visible from all over town. And lots of people have got fond memories of going up it when they were a kid. And actually, if you tell any of those people that you're planning on getting there entirely on foot from town to top, just like Roseberry Topping, they'll look at you like you've taken leave of your senses. In the case of Roseberry Topping, that's probably fair enough. 11 miles is a reasonable distance. But the trig point at the summit of Clougher Pike is less than 6 miles from my front door. I can be there in an hour. So on one particular occasion, in early March 2020, I set out. I've got an exceptionally long run planned on this occasion, and Clougher Pike is just the beginning. So I've headed out early. It's shortly after 3. Yeah, there is a 3 in the morning. Yeah. The air is cold and damp. And the main thing I can see in the beam of my head torch is the plumes of my own breath. On the country roads of the first 4 miles, I see one vehicle. And for the next 5 hours, that's the last reminder I'll have that human life hasn't been suddenly obliterated. I leave the road at Birkbank Car Park. First up a boggy track through the woods, then up even boggier open fellside. As I climb higher, it gets colder. I'm wearing multiple layers, but I already need to pick up the pace in order to keep warm. 5 miles in to what's going to be the longest run I've ever done, and I'm already freezing cold, wet through, and filthy with mud. It's absolutely wonderful. Getting wet and muddy, they're things grown-ups aren't supposed to do, aren't they? I'm breaking scores of those unwritten rules we all live by. I'm bounding over rocks and scrambling up boulders, and my hands are getting as filthy as my feet and legs, and breath is short, but life is long. I reach a cairn, I'm almost at the top. One more push, and then I reach the trig point. And this is where the views would open up. If it wasn't still absolutely pitch dark. You'd be able to see a panorama over the Yorkshire Dales, round to the Lake District, all the way out to the Irish Sea. You'd be able to see Blackpool Tower, if it was a clear day and you squinted a bit. You'd be able to see all that, but I'm now pretty much at the limit of where I'd have been allowed to go until 2005. I could stop and enjoy the view, if there was one. But until 2005, at this point, I'd have had to turn around.
Clougher Pike is at the western edge of the Forest of Bowland, and that whole Forest of Bowland area, a huge area, stood as a reminder that the victory that was won at Kinder Scout wasn't a victory that was won right across the country. And so there were still these huge areas of land which were continually remained out of bound, inadmissible.
The word forest, well, the Forest of Bowland is quite a misleading name in some ways. It's called the Forest of Bowland. I think there are probably 6 trees across this whole area of moorland. The word forest's got nothing to do with trees at root. Does anyone know what the word forest means? Hunting grounds, yeah, and I love that you put your hand up there. That was beautiful. Yeah, it's even today the Forest of Bowland is grouse hunting territory. And somewhere in that area, the world record was set for most birds bagged in a day.
2,929 in one shoot, August 1915.
Wasn't there anything else going on round about then?
The Forest of Bowland, a lot of it is owned by the Duchy of Lancaster, which means in effect that money paid for hunting, shooting and for rent of property on the land is basically paid directly to His Majesty the King.
Although most of it is owned by the Duke of Westminster, or strictly speaking, to a family trust set up by a previous Duke of Westminster in the 1960s as a tax avoidance scheme, from which the current Duke rents back the house and the shooting rights at a very favourable rate. It's because of these people, and people like these, that there were still keep out signs all around this area less than 20 years ago.
But you could choose to ignore those keep out signs if you decided to get 7 of your mates, make an 8-strong hunting party and decide to go out grouse shooting, try and beat the record, 2,930 birds in a single day, and for the privilege of that one-day shoot it would cost you £20,000.
It took another 70 years after the Kinder Scout mass trespass. But in the year 2000, after decades of unrelenting pressure, Parliament finally passed the Countryside Rights of Way Act, confirming our right to roam over these huge swathes of previously inaccessible countryside. At last, these hills were ours. So that means on this occasion I can carry on from the Clough of Pike trig point, and that every onward step is a celebration of what's possible. And it's great running from here. It's rocky, it's muddy, it's undulating. You've got to watch every step. You've got to stay super alert. But I'm bounding over rocks and slopping through mud and violating all those standards of adult behaviour once again. So today, I'm going to just keep going over Clough of Pike, over the rest of the tops of the Forest of Bowland, and far, far beyond. The freedom to behave like a big kid up here has been won for me, and this run is my celebration.
Rolling boulders down a hill, for a laugh and for a thrill. So what if someone might get killed? Lighting fires and stealing sweets, spent forever on your feet, endless hours on the streets. Eat your dinner out the door, run and laugh and jump some more, bicycle and ball, out until you're cold. Let us play, let us play, let the future run away, 'cause there's only today. Let us play, let us play, let us play, misbehave and disobey, and who cares anyway? Let us play. Middle-aged jogging joined a club, Park Run was your gateway drug, feeling healthy, looking good. And now it's off the path and through the trees, jump the rivers, slide the screes, muddy elbows, muddy knees. Eat your dinner out the door, run and run and run some more, over hills and far away, grab your studs and play. Let us play, let us play, let the future run away, 'cause there's only today. let us play. Let us play, let us play, misbehave and disobey. Can who cares anyway? Let us play. Let us play. Thank you.
So over the course of a year and a bit, Boff and I did run a series of routes from City to Peak, Lancaster to Clough Pike, Stockton to Rosebery Topping, and so on. But somehow these journeys hadn't quite been enough. We found we wanted to connect the stories up. So as these things do, it grew into a decision to connect up as many of these stories as possible in one epic run. It would be a pilgrimage. It would be a journey to the source of our freedom to make this journey. It would be about 88 miles. Boff, true or false? When I got to you in your camper van in a car park in Sladeburn, so this is on the far side of the Forest of Bowland from Lancaster after about 22 of these 88 miles. True or false? At this point, I was still looking pretty good.
True.
Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you? To be honest, neither was I. The big tops of the Forest of Bowland had been tougher going than I'd really bargained for. I think I mentioned that it was early March. There was still thick snow on some of the tops. I kept plunging my feet into these hidden pools of ice-cold water. Basically, I'd spent 4 or 5 hours lying to myself about how miserable I was feeling. But as I trotted down into Sladeburn, thinking about baked beans and hot coffee in Boff's camper van, I felt my skin start to warm in the rising sun. Colour crept back into the world, and I could feel my toes. I spontaneously opened out my stride, and I found myself feeling full of optimism all over again.
So the plan is that we set off from Lancaster, from where Dan lives, together, and then we go over Clough Pike, over the Forest of Bowland, head kind of south to get to the foot of Pendle Hill, then up over the summit of Pendle, down into Burnley, along the Calder Valley, to Todmorden. Danny's showing you the route on this map that we're sitting on. Up from Todmorden onto the hills there, where you can join the Pennine Way. And from the Pennine Way, you can head south, a bit of a jump back to the other map. South, up and down and up and down, somewhere. Across the M62, right into the the north end of the Peak District. And from there, you can head again up and down until basically you come to the top of Kinder Scout, which, as I said, is where all these stories come back to. And the reason we wanted to do this run was because we wanted to celebrate the fact that we can.
Which is all very well for him to say. But at nearly 90 miles, it was also going to be more than twice as far as I've ever run before.
And about 4 or 5 weeks before we were going to set off on this run together, I broke my toe going downstairs for breakfast. Which meant that I would be able to do little bits of it, but in general, Dan would do most of the run entirely on his own.
More than twice as far as I've ever run before. Over rough, remote, mountain terrain I've recce'd maybe 2/3 of, through 2 nights of darkness, mostly alone. What a bloody idiot. Just remind me why?
Why? Because people like Benny Rothman and the trespassers had fought for the right of, that we could do that and we could access the land, and they were also fighting for the rights of working people, especially right across the land, to have their day out in the hills.
We take it for granted a bit, I think, a day in the hills. The idea that a day in the hills, it might be, well, it's kind of inconceivable that it might be in any way under threat. But these are relatively recent victories. They're easily reversed. They are under threat on any number of fronts. And so we figured if you don't use these freedoms, well, you might well lose these freedoms.
And it's worth mentioning as well that the Kinder trespassers, who are now kind of seen as a great kind of heroic part of British history for opening up the land for us all, but at the time, like the suffragettes before them, they were vilified in the press. And one of the reasons they were vilified is because they didn't just stop at wanting access to the land. They called themselves International Revolutionary Socialists, and they didn't just want access to the land, they wanted access and opportunity and equality for all people in all walks of life.
And I think it's easy for us, as two white blokes, to sit here celebrating the achievements of some other white blokes, or mostly white blokes. But we should probably stop to acknowledge that if these freedoms are under threat for us, they're barely even materialised for a lot of other people. It's easy for us as two white blokes to say, well, why don't you just strap on your head torch and go out for a run over the pathless moors in the dead of night? But we'd be fools not to acknowledge that isn't such an easy choice for everyone. For some women, for example, for people of colour. I want these freedoms to be available to everyone. And grandiose though it might sound, we conceived this run not just as a declaration of the fact that these rights exist, but as a demand that these rights continue to exist for everyone, for all time.
And I feel it's probably time for a digression. I was frightened he was going to burst then. So. I'm not going to tell you any more about these foot pedals. I'm going to tell you about a French situationist in the 1950s and 60s. Yes, there is a point to this. He's called Guy Debord, and he wrote a book and made a film called The Society of the Spectacle. And what he was doing, he was writing about the fact that after the Second World War, there was such a kind of onslaught of rampant consumerism, everything was up for sale, that he conceived this idea called the spectacle, which was that all the things that we had previously taken for granted as being things that we could do for free, simple pleasures like going walking or running, for instance, were being somehow sold back to us as a second-hand kind of sanitized version. And so we would start becoming obsessed with, things like gear and collecting Strava segments, for instance.
There it is. If you want to see the Strava data about this long run, by the way, you have a copy of it in your programmes.
Guy Debord would say as well, if he were around today, which he's not, he would say that there are fantastic things that we've got, technology that we've got, like, for instance, Google Earth, which is an amazing resource. And you can take in the top of Ilkley Moor, for instance, the 12 Apostles. You can go on Google Earth, sit at home, look on your laptop, and you can zoom right down. You should try it. It's quite incredible. And you almost feel like you're there. It's so detailed. And Guy Debord would go, that's the spectacle. You're not there. He would say, Google Earth is never going to be the Earth, because if you're actually up on the top of Ilkley, probably most days for 6-7 months of the year, there is no view, and it's just really muddy and raining and freezing. But it doesn't matter how uncomfortable you are. You can kind of rejoice in the idea that somehow, whatever else happens, that you've escaped.
A lot of the next section of my long run, which is about 10 miles from Sladeburn to the foot of Pendle Hill, it felt a little bit like one of Guy Debord's situationist pranks, a spectacular disruption of the spectacle designed to draw attention to the unreality we've been living in this whole time. As the sun got higher in the sky, I saw a pair of hares boxing against the backdrop of a hedgerow. And the immediate tangibility of this vision, it startled me into the present. Reality is not a dot on Google Earth or a line on a map or a fence that blocks that line. Reality is boxing hares and breath and red kites. Then, about 50 metres away, I know no one's going to believe this, by the way, and I didn't take a photograph to prove it, because I was just there, just experiencing being there. Is that what you're after, Guy Debord?
Sounds good.
But anyway, somewhere between here and here, somewhere between those 2 points, I saw an ostrich in the next field. Presumably it was on the run from somewhere that was planning on turning it into burgers. I don't know. Certainly it was moving a lot faster than I was. Simultaneously beautiful and sort of ridiculous, it cleared a neck-high fence in a single bound and Usain bolted its way towards the horizon. I hope that, unlike me, it wasn't wearing a tracking device, and that therefore its attempt at escape would be more successful than mine. I promise this wasn't a hallucination. Reality just looks better 30 miles in. Then, approaching the foot of Pendle Hill, I spot Boff in the distance. The next section over Pendle, we're running together. I'm a third of the way through already. The sun is high in the sky, and it's turning into a beautiful day. How lucky am I to have so much more of this ahead of me? How lucky am I that history has won me the right to do this? I climb a little incline round a ruined barn, meet up with me mate for a bit of pasta and a big hill, and I feel like the king of a reality that no one else even knows exists.
Down in the town, they're drowning in brands, delivery vans and Pepsi cans, key commands and fast food stands. Up on the hills, a red kite learns to fly, and a fir tree on its tiptoes is reaching for the sky. Away from the sirens and the supermarket queues, where no one tries to sell you something new. Scrambling up, tumbling down, the whole wide world around, that's where I'll be found, out in the back of beyond. Out in the back of beyond. There's a truth where your feet meet the primeval ooze, where the universe is sticking to the soles of your shoes, and your choice of a ringtone, it doesn't mean a thing. You can feel like a king where the blackbirds sing. Away from the sirens and the supermarket queues, where no one tries to sell you something new. Scrambling up, tumbling down, the whole wide world around, that's where I'll be found, out in the back of beyond. Out in the back of beyond. Thank you.
Boff, true or false? When I got to you at the foot of Pendle Hill, at this point, I was still looking pretty good.
True.
It's going surprisingly well, isn't it? It's definitely going to carry on like this. Pendle's your hill, isn't it? I mean,
I don't actually own it. No.
But
I'm not the king of Pendle Hill. No.
It's like your roseberry topping. It's special.
It is special, yeah. Unlike roseberry topping, it doesn't have a name that sounds like a strawberry ice cream.
That's fighting talk.
Pendle Hill is like Dan was saying earlier about Rosebery Topping, is that it's one of those places where anyone who's grown up in any of the towns and villages around it has stories about going up there, especially as kids, because there's lots of things going on. It's just like a hill completely on its own, surrounded by fairly flat land. So everyone's got stories about it. I have bored Dan with many of these stories. One of the first times that you will remember is about Pendle Hill is as a kid when you go up and your parents aren't with you. So you decide you're going to go up, which we did one Saturday afternoon when I was about 13 or 14. And we walked from the centre of Burnley, from where we lived in Burnley, up to the foot of Pendle, and we were aiming to get to the top, and it was really hot, and we stopped in a village called Sabden, which is at the bottom of the Nick of Pendle. Sabden's a small village. I would guess there's 200 houses there, and 2 shops, 1 corner shop. And at the time we said, let's go in the corner shop before this final, attempt to get to the summit. So we went in the shop, and we bought whatever we bought, and the guy behind the counter said, just got to tell you lads, we had that there Ziggy Stardust in today, this morning. And we said, what? You mean David Bowie? And he said, yeah, Ziggy Stardust. He said he came in this morning for milk and eggs. And we said, why would David Bowie be coming in your shop in Sabden for milk and eggs? And he said, his grandmother lives here in Sabden, and he comes over every fortnight to visit her. Comes in for some shopping in the morning. He might be coming in this afternoon. We're like, oh, okay. So when you're 13, you believe what adults tell you. So we didn't get to the top of Pendle Hill, and we sat outside his shop for nearly 3 hours. And it was probably several months later, whilst we were at school, after we'd told everybody at school that David Bowie's grandma lives in Sabden, that it dawned on us that it might not be real. And I'm not like a bitter man who carries grudges, but when the internet came along, I looked up where David Bowie would have been on that weekend, just to clarify. And he was in New York, recording an album with Iggy Pop. And not only that, but it was during his period when he was strung out on heroin. And I remember thinking, looking at the internet, I was thinking, if he were on heroin, he wouldn't be buying milk and eggs, would he? So that's a story about not getting to the top of a hill.
Sorry, how do you come back from that? Here's another true or false. Given the specialness of Pendle in your personal history. True or false, the way I sprang up all 1,860 feet of it was frankly disrespectful.
I'm going to say false. Not because I thought it was disrespectful, but because when you say sprang up, there was no springing going on at this point.
That is fair. Okay, true or false, I was at least moving faster than the walkers.
Yeah, you were. That's true.
They were coming downhill.
Yeah.
Okay. It's fair. I wasn't springing. If there's a kind of standard language that gets used about this kind of endurance endeavour, these kind of triumph over adversity narratives of endurance, and you always hear this phrase, just popped into my head, I felt like I had wings on my feet. Honestly can't see how that would have helped. I think you'd overbalance. Anyway, I didn't feel like that, but I did still feel really quite good at this point. So let's jump forward about 10 miles to when I next met up with Boff on the far side of Burnley, about here, in Townley Park. This would be about 40 miles in. True or false? At this point, I was still looking fantastic.
False.
At this point, I was still looking pretty good.
False.
At this point, I was still looking okay.
False. Keep going.
Yeah, I had started to lose it a little bit in that 10 miles. I'd actually been looking forward to the last 4 miles into Burnley. 4 nice flat miles along the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. But it turned out I was not ready to get off lovely, soft, forgiving grass and onto the pound and slap of asphalt. Every footfall exactly the same punishment as the footfall before. Normally with running, the idea is that your legs kind of propel you forwards. At some point during that 4-mile stretch along the canal, I felt like I needed to kind of haul my uncooperative legs along behind me. If I was telling one of those standard triumph over adversity narratives of endurance, well, in those, what always happens at this point is your legs miraculously start to rally. Now would be a really good time for that to start to happen.
40 miles in, the fun's wearing thin, stumbling from numbness to pain. Burnt out and tired, unaware, uninspired, weary and washed out and drained. And I feel like my feet have been screwed on all wrong. There's a surly black dog who's been tagging along, and an out-of-tune choir, they're all singing this song. It says, stop, in the name of God, stop. Oh, I'm too tired to ask myself why, and I just want to break down and cry, and I think I might lay down and die. But I won't, and I don't. Too tight to spit, this gel tastes like shit, and it's hard enough keeping it down. I've had more than enough, now I want to get off this not very merry-go-round. I ran with the angels, but now I cannot. My race about run, my willpower shot. I'll sign my surrender in spit and in snot. It says stop, in the name of just stop. Oh, I'm too tired to ask myself why, and I just want to break down and cry, and I think I might lay down and die. But I can't, and I don't. I won't, and I don't. I won't, and I don't.
Thank you. At some point during the gradual climb out of Burnley, somewhere between 40 and 45 miles, I'd say, I found that I had stopped worrying about my legs. If I was telling one of those triumph over adversity standard narratives of endurance, at this point I'd probably say something like, 10 miles later, as I ran through the fading daylight along the first stretch of Pennine Way, I was running ever stronger. I wasn't running ever stronger. I'd just figured out how to move on legs that don't want to move. The Pennine Way is the final third of this route. Tom Stevenson's long-distance footpath is going to take me all the way to Kinder. The Pennine Way is part of the history of access to the hills in this country, and by running it, I'm part of that history. The Pennine Way is also one of the most popular routes in the country, and the parts of it I've walked or run before have all been exceptionally well waymarked and almost entirely paved with flagstones made out of millstone grit. Those stones were quarried in these hills, used to build mills up and down the valleys, and now that the mills have closed, the stones have been carried back home to help guide walkers and runners through these hills. So that's why I haven't recce'd most of the final third of the route. The founders of the Pennine Way are going to walk with me all the way to Kinder. It'll be easy. But what seems easy by day starts to seem a little bit trickier as darkness closes in and in, until all you can really see is what's visible in the beam of a head torch. And it turns out the Pennine Way isn't paved with flagstones all the way along, far from it. But it is still well waymarked and hard to lose. Until it isn't. Slow down even more. Check the map again and again. The first warning came upon Blackstone Edge, where the Pennine Way, entirely unmarked, cuts sharply uphill off the main track. I breezed straight past this turn-off before realising, hang on, the turning marked on the map really ought to have gone past it by now. Stop. Check the map. Check the terrain. Except that it's now virtually pitch dark, so there's very little terrain available to be checked. The tracking device I'm wearing, so that Boff can see how far off I am from getting to his camper van for beans and coffee. It connects to a website, and I shouldn't waste battery on my phone, but just to be sure, I get it out and log on to the tracker website to see if the digital dot on the screen corresponds to where I think I am. And it's just as I thought. Ah, well done me. And just as I'm putting my phone back in my pocket, Boff rings it.
Dan, you've gone the wrong way.
I know. Thank you. I was just turning round. So off I go, reassured, actually, that all of the systems, map, compass, tracker, phone contact, everything is working as it should to keep me safe. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. I emerge briefly from the darkness to cross a strip-lit footbridge over the Technicolor M62. I've completely lost track of time by this point. It's maybe 9 or 10 p.m. and I am astonished by the ferocity of the traffic. Where are all these people going? What are they doing? Has nobody told them that they don't have to? They could be up here in the wilderness, like me. Except I'm cold and increasingly tired. There's frankly very little of me left by this point except grim-faced determination. I run across Marsden Moor in a stupor, losing any interest in the Kinder trespassers, in the rights I'm exercising, in escaping the confines of 21st century digital life. I've entered a state of mind, without any reflection or awareness of elsewhere. I'm just here, a little over 2/3 of the way through, literally aching to get this finished. At times I thought, I bet it's beautiful round here, if you could see it. I had this vague sense of trees and rivers, deep gorges and steep valleys, as much from the map as from the world. But in my tunnel vision focus on getting this done, I've now completely lost sight of why I'm doing it. 1,000 years ago, this country was parcelled up between just over 200 barons who'd helped King William I conquer the country, and the land ownership patterns in this part of the country still reflect that. It hurts if you let yourself think about it. Half the rural land in England and Wales is owned by 0.06% of the population. We've come a long way since King William I. We've got a long way still to go. At the next checkpoint, I said to Boff, not much more than a marathon left to do. Looking out of the camper van window at the now total darkness that I'd need to navigate through for the next several hours, I did not succeed in convincing myself that this distance was small. But it was another couple of hours before I really started to come unstuck. Heading towards Wessenden Head, sometime after midnight, I'd dropped down about 20 metres of steep slab steps to a river, which I crossed, only to find that the path steeply up the other side that the map expected me to take didn't exist. I went round in circles for a bit before finding another set of steps down to another river, which I crossed, finding no path up there either. There's only one river marked on the map. I got out my phone to check the tracker website again. No signal. I got out the map, figured out an alternative route to Wessenden, and turned back the way I'd come to try and find that path instead.
I was in the camper van 4.5, 5 miles south of where Dan was. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, freezing cold, frost and snow on the ground. And I was spending my evening looking at my phone, watching a dot, which had long since stopped being Dan. It was just a dot crawling across my smartphone screen. God, this is awful. So I watch it following this map, and I see it going down a river valley, which I kind of know because I've run there quite a lot of times, and it gets to a river crossing. Instead of crossing the river and joining the Pennine Way path, the dot stops, waits a minute, turns around, and starts going back 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So I start trying to ring Dan up, but there's no phone signal. It's just leave a message, leave a message. I wait until the dot gets kind of towards the top, and it stops for a while this time, 3, 4, 5 minutes. I think, okay, this is good because Dan's obviously realised he's going completely the wrong way, and he's checking his map and compass. And then I shouldn't think this, but I do. I think, I don't know if Dan has an idea what to do with a compass. I kind of imagine him getting it out, and it's still being kind of wrapped in cellophane, and kind of thinking, well, where is the LED lights? I don't know.
I mean, you mock, but that does sound quite good, doesn't it?
So I'm watching this little dot, and eventually it does start moving again until it goes back. It's still going the wrong way, but it crests a hill, and I get a phone signal. Dan.
Hi.
You are going a really weird way.
There's another route round to Wessenden, so I'm going that way instead.
Okay, but you were in the right place half an hour ago at the river crossing. That was absolutely right.
There's 2 river crossings, but only one of them's marked on the map.
Believe me, you're in the right place. If you can get back to that river crossing, just retrace your steps, cross the river, there's the path.
I'm not going all that way back just to not be able to find the path again.
You're going to have to trust me. Just go back, otherwise you're going to be like an hour, 2 hours extra.
So I gritted my teeth and headed down, up, down, back over the 2 rivers. I've long since lost interest in the condition of my legs, but this is still a real slog. And there, on the far side of the second river, laughing at me for not having seen it the first time, is the path.
So I watched the dot, follow back where it had been to, down to the river crossings, gets to the river and crosses over, rejoins the path and starts moving towards me. And I think, okay, fine, great. Hooray for technology. And then it stops again. And this time it stops for 5 minutes and maybe 10 minutes. And I think, well, he's maybe just checking, maybe he's having something to eat, maybe he's having a really long piss. So I wait a little bit longer. I wait 15 minutes. It gets to about 20 minutes, and I think, maybe I ought to be doing something. This dot is just static, and there's no phone signal. So I get out and start kind of walking around, wondering what I'm going to do. And the place where I'm parked, it's and some of you will probably know it. It's a road that crosses the Pennines right at a really high part, and there's a road junction there. And at this road junction, it's been decided that this is a place where people lay these kind of grim floral tributes to the victims of the Moors murderers. And so there are it's the middle of the night. There's just dead flowers dying on these fences with like these old fading pictures. And I'm thinking, this is terrible. What a terrible place. What am I doing here? We've broken two of the cardinal rules of safe running at night, especially over the moors in winter. If you're going to do that, you recce it during the day so you can picture it, so you know where you're meant to be going. And secondly, you don't do it on your own. You make sure you're with somebody else in case something goes wrong. So I'm thinking this, and it gets to half an hour and then 35 minutes. And I'm really getting worried. I think, right, I should do something about it. I'll start running up the path. I'll get to where the stop dot is. So I head up there. It's like 5 miles, so I know it's going to take me a long time. And I'm weirdly shouting Dan's name into the darkness like a maniac and thinking, this is absolutely ridiculous. And as I do that, I start thinking, well, if it's just a phone signal and a tracker signal, and then Dan is actually on his way here and he gets to the camper and I'm up 5 miles north where the dot has stopped, that would be stupid. So I head back to the camper thinking, what can I do? I should, at this point, it's 45, 50 minutes. And it gets to 50 minutes and I think, I should ring the police. I should ring Mountain Rescue. I've got to be sensible here. And 55 minutes and it's nearly an hour. And I start thinking this awful thought of a conversation that I'm going to have with Dan's partner, Sarah, sometime in the future, where we're sitting down together and she's saying to me, so, Boff, let me get this straight. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, pitch black in the middle of winter, and the dot had stopped, and you sat there for an hour and didn't do anything. And it's at this point, I think, we just came on this thing because we wanted to kind of celebrate this idea of freedom and access, and we wanted to escape 21st century technology and basically tell this great story. And instead, I'm just in the middle of the moors at night, feeling absolutely awful, just following a tiny blinking digital dot. Wake up, pip, pip, same routine. Smartphone, Fitbit, laptop screen. Tell me where I'm going, tell me where I've been. Alexa, tell me, what does it mean when I think I find myself talking to a bloody machine? You try to beat the noughts and ones, pick it all up and run out of the door, and you've already won. You beat the noughts and ones. You beat the noughts and ones. You beat the noughts and ones. Wake up, pip, pip, same routine. Digital dot on a smartphone screen. Tell me where I'm going, tell me where he's been. Alexa, tell me, what does it mean when I'm thinking that a dot is a human being? You try to beat the noughts and ones. You switch it all on and run out of the door, and you think you won, but you become the noughts and ones. You become the noughts and ones. You become the noughts and ones. And then, out of the darkness, here comes Dan trotting towards me with a big grin on his face.
When I got in the van, I was actually quite surprised by Boff's level of concern. What are you talking about? Of course I'm all right. Yeah, I'd always known that there'd be challenges. And yes, it's probably true that at this point I was no longer exactly enjoying those challenges. But I was still, crucially, enjoying the sense that I was just about rising to them. But 2 or 3 times, Boff said to me,
Do you want to carry on?
I got a bit paranoid. Did I really look that bad?
You really look that bad. But to be honest, my kind of pessimism was probably more due to a deteriorating relationship with a digital dot.
But I did want to carry on. I didn't have any doubt. And in any case, it can't get any trickier than that last section, can it? And indeed, those hugely reassuring Pennine Way flagstones guided me for long sections of the next climb up Black Hill, the first serious summit since Pendle. There was water flowing over most of those flagstones, making them seriously slippy, but at least they were there as a navigational handrail. As I climbed higher, more and more of that water had frozen solid, so I was slipping and sliding all over the place. As I climbed higher still, I didn't need to worry about slipping over anymore, because the stones were covered with increasingly thick snow, often entirely obscuring any evidence that there was a path. So I was right back on high alert. Is that a flagstone under there? Yes. Still going the right way. Is that the path? No. Check back a bit. There it is. I passed the trig point at the summit of Black Hill, feeling nothing but relief. This reassurance that, at least for now, I was still going the right way. But then I let the thought in at last. I am utterly miserable. I'm cold. I'm incredibly tired. And if I'm not lost exactly, I'm hanging on to found by my fingertips. And why? I'm celebrating the achievements of some people who fought for the right to go beyond the permitted routes. And I'm celebrating that by sticking doggedly to the path. So far am I from contributing anything to widening access that nothing could terrify me more than accidentally leaving the path. I am hyper alert, more awake than I've ever been, even though it's now 3 a.m. and I've been running for 24 hours, and every particle of that alertness is directed towards not leaving the path. The path is the spectacle, the digested version of wilderness. The real wild all around me is so much more visceral and awesome and real, and I cannot under any circumstances contemplate straying into that. If I did, I might not be found for days. As I came down the other side of Black Hill and dropped below the snow line, I thought, well, at least I don't have to worry about ice on the flagstones from this point. Because from this point, the Pennine Way pathmakers abandoned me too. The path became nothing more than a faint, winding track, and that meant every time I lost it, finding it again became that bit more difficult. This is what it means to escape the city. The lights, the noise. This is what being out on your own really means. Check back, check forward, check again. Then the map says Ford. Ford. Fords. Fords. Ford. It's basically impossible to say how many Fords there are. You cross what I think is the same river about 12 times. And in a world reduced to the narrow beam of a head torch, all of these river crossings look the same. I've crossed here before. No, that stepping stone is at a slightly different angle, I think. But there's no path up on the other side. Shine the head torch round desperately. Oh, yes, there is. There. Up again, down again. I've crossed here before. There's no path up. Panic, relief, panic, relief. A roller coaster is fun for maybe 2 minutes. I've been riding this wave of adrenalized concentration for hours on 2 nights of little or no sleep. Run, stop, check the map, check the compass, tread carefully on the ice, up again, down again, check back, check forward, map, compass, panic, relief, stop the ride, I want to get off!
Round and round the worry loop of fear and doubt and dread, there are people loudly squabbling, and they're all inside my head. And all these people are me, and they're telling pointless lies, and they're everyone afraid, and they don't know why. Which way up is up? How far down is down? There's only studs and gravity to keep my feet on the ground. I can't move, I can't stop. I am lost and I am found, and I can't follow a bearing in a world that's spinning round, spinning round, spinning round. Running through the darkness, inventing faults and flaws. There's a path from here to somewhere, but I don't know where it goes. I jump across the same stream again and again and again, and all the voices of reason start a whispering campaign. Which way up is up? How far down is down? There's only studs and gravity to keep my feet on the ground. I can't move, I can't stop. I am lost and I am found, and I can't follow a bearing in a world that's spinning round, spinning round, spinning round, spinning round, spinning round.
It took about 2 hours aboard that roller coaster to cover just over 4 miles from the summit of Black Hill to the next checkpoint at Crowden. And what I didn't know was that for most of this time there'd again been no signal from my tracker. So Boff had no idea if I was moving or not, alive or not. And he was aboard his own roller coaster all over again. I don't think I was smiling this time when he met me off the trail and walked me down to the camper van in the car park. I don't think I've ever been so happy to get underneath a roof. I had a cup of coffee. I had some beans. I had a Mars bar. Before night fell, I'd been roughly on schedule to finish this whole thing inside about 24 hours. Since the onset of darkness, that schedule had slipped and slipped, and now it was looking more like 30 hours, so long as I got moving again soon. I had another cup of coffee. I had some soup. I was rapidly running out of excuses not to get outside. Boff, true or false? At this point, just shy of 80 miles in, I was a complete and total wreck.
Very true.
My legs were actually doing okay. I was still focused. I was relatively alert. Emotionally, though, I'd gone. I found the idea of another section like the one I'd just experienced, even like the one before that, unbearable, actually frightening in its awfulness. I only had one section left to do on my own, about 7 or 8 miles over Bleaklow, admittedly quite a big hill, so no small endeavour, but still, last section left to do on my own, before we do the final section up to Kinder Scout together. But I just really didn't want to get out of the van. If Boff had asked me at this point, as he had at Wessenden, whether or not I wanted to carry on, I don't know what I'd have said. You didn't ask me that, did you?
I didn't ask you that because at this point it felt like we were close enough to the end that my job was just to get as much food inside that man as possible and get him out of the van and moving.
What finally did get me out of the van was the knowledge that the sun would come up. At some point during this next section, finally, I might start to warm up. Getting lost would become so much more difficult. Maybe it would even be beautiful. And then after I crest Bleaklow, I'll be able to run down the other side with increasing confidence. I'll meet up with Boff at the final road crossing and we'll run the final section to Kinder together, my legs now feeling as fresh as if I've just got out of bed. I'll bound up to the Kinder Scout trig point like a mountain goat and laugh with the sudden ridiculous ease of it all. We'll jog back down a way and pop open a miniature bottle of champagne on the spot where those Kinder trespassers had their victory rally all those years ago. These hills are ours. I've done it. They're mine. Now, if that bit sounds like it's been structured according to the tropes of every standard triumph over adversity endurance narrative ever told, well, that's because that's true. I didn't have that experience. But here's what actually happened. I told myself that story. It got me out of the van. And as I climbed the side of Bleaklow, it was getting noticeably colder, thanks to a really bitter wind. But so long as I keep moving with purpose, I'll be okay. But navigation was once again tricky, as the one path marked on the map was cut across again and again and again by lots of other things that really did look like paths. As I climbed higher, it got colder. I sped up. So did that wind. I was wearing 7 layers by this point, but I was beginning to feel dangerously cold. But the sun was coming up at last, revealing nothing but a thick mist. Yet again, I began to despair of ever finding the right way. Is that the path? Is that a path? Keep moving. Keep moving. What am I doing? For centuries, this was the largest area in England without a public path. Now I can run here, but still. Half the rural land in England and Wales is owned by 0.06% of the population, and 90% of that land remains inaccessible, off limits. The arc of history might well curve towards progress, but the route is not always easy to find. Is that the path? Is that a path? Cold. Check back. Cold. Check forward. Cold. Check the map. Shiver. Check the compass. Teeth chatter. Drop the compass. And in the end, it was a split-second decision. The only safe option left at this point is to get the fuck off this mountain as quickly as possible before hypothermia sets in. So I turned round and headed back down the side of Bleaklow the same way I'd come up it.
Again, I was 5 miles south of where Dan was at Bleaklow. No phone signal, no tracker signal, a really disappointing dawn coming up, freezing cold, with not a clue what was going on.
So my journey ended not at the top of Kinder Scout, but at the foot of Bleaklow, on a step by the main road between Huddersfield and Manchester, shivering, wrapped in an emergency foil blanket, eating a protein bar, waiting for Boff to get my messages and head back round from the top road. We have a right to access these hills, so long as we keep fighting for it. But they're not ours. They will long outlive humanity. They'll even outlive the stone slabs that we cut out of their sides and borrowed for a time. A couple of blokes pulled up in a plasterer's van and asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, I'm absolutely fine. They took quite a bit of convincing. I didn't think I looked that bad. Do you want this? They said. I stared blankly at whatever it was in their hands. Well, what is it? I said. It's one of those, they said, which really didn't help to clarify the matter. I took whatever it was from them, basically just to get rid of them, and sat back down on my step. What they'd given me, it turns out, was an emergency foil blanket to match the one I was already wrapped in.
So I was waiting and waiting and waiting. Eventually I had to drive somewhere to try and get a phone signal, and then all the messages came in. Dan had retreated back down Bleaklow, was down at Crowden, and I had to drive round as quickly as I could to find where he was. And as I was driving, I kind of had this plan. I thought, well, you know, we kind of set on this big journey trying to tell a story. So we'll get there, and Dan can get in the van and get warm, and I can finish the last 10 or 12 miles, and then at least we can say we finished the story. But as I came round the corner and saw Dan sitting on this step in a foil blanket, I thought the story isn't the important thing here.
In terms of the stories we get told, the standard narrative, if you like, it sometimes feels like there's nothing outside of the goal, the end point. And if you don't achieve that goal, well, you've achieved nothing. But then Boff pulled up in his camper van, and as I got into the passenger seat, he put my home address into his sat-nav, and it came up on the screen, 1 hour and 51 minutes. I thought, well, it can't be that long of a drive. I've just run here. And then, oh yeah, it's taken me 28 hours. I've run more than twice as far as I've ever run before, along rights of way, most of which didn't exist less than a century ago. That is something. That really is something.
Run yourself invisible against the green and brown. Run the summits up and then run the valleys down. This spinning ball of everything, it all comes back to you. The whole wide world connected to the patterns on your shoes. Run to find a clearer view. We're not running away, we're running to. These hills are ours, they're ours to borrow. These hills are ours, they're ours to share. To tell a story that we were there. These hills are ours, these hills are ours to share. Run the hills at midnight, head torch under stars. Run to try to lose yourself and to find out who you are. You won't remember all the humdrum day to day, but you'll remember every summit that took your breath away. Run to find a clearer view. We're not running away, we're running to.
Just over a year later, in April 2021, we went back to Kinder. It was the anniversary of the Kinder Scout mass trespass. We hadn't seen each other in person in over a year. This seemed like the perfect way to reunite. We ran together the whole section I hadn't managed the previous year, over Bleaklow, over Kinder, and then on down into Edale. By day, and feeling fresh, navigation was embarrassingly easy. Although we did manage to miss the summit of Kinder by taking a path that Boff was adamant would join back up with the main one. We doubled back on ourselves and made absolutely sure this time. I didn't pop open a miniature bottle of champagne on the summit, but I did take a selfie at the trig point, which I subsequently posted on Strava, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Take that, Guy Debord. It was a glorious day, and not just because of this sense of unfinished business, but because of all the people we saw that day. Not just crusty middle-aged blokes like us, all kinds of people. Young people, old people, people of all races. So many young couples. Many of those people, I'd imagine, had no idea what anniversary it happened to be. They just knew we've been stuck inside for a year. And isn't it a beautiful day? Many of them, I think, might well have never even heard of the Kinder Scout mass trespass. I imagined them asking, well, why would such a thing ever have been necessary? On a day like this, the idea that access to a place like this could ever be forbidden, it seems self-evidently absurd. I've never felt so hopeful for the future.
These hills are ours, they're ours to borrow. These hills are ours, they're ours to share, to tell a story that we were there. These hills are ours, these hills are ours to share. These hills are ours to share.